scary stories. This is definitely going to be hard to believe, and I know, but I feel this is good for me. It's time I tell this story, so please hear me out. I just apologize for this being so short. Currently, it's 1:05 in the morning, and honestly, I don't think I can write this any time but now. It needs to be established, so here we go. Back in 2017, my cousin Austin killed his ex-girlfriend, and then himself. I hung out with him the night he did it, according to the police, at about 7:30 a.m. He got in an argument with the girlfriend's mother over the girlfriend leaving him. He got angry and pulled a pistol and shot her in the abdomen. When the girlfriend came rushing into the room, he shot her too, right in the chest. Then he went into another room and shot her sister. Allegedly, he just left them to bleed out. He just walked out of the house and drove away, going straight to mine, although he didn't show up to mine until about 1:30 that day. But I swear he acted normal, nothing unusual, at least to me. All couples fight, so when this happened, I figured he was just in a bad situation. He told me he was having some relationship issues, and he needed somewhere to stay. So I just ordered a pizza, and we watched a Netflix documentary. Somehow, I ended up falling asleep and woke up a few hours later. By the time I woke up, news of the murders actually broke. Austin's picture was on the TV screen, and he was long gone. Immediately, I called the police and informed them the boyfriend of the victim stayed at my house, and before I knew it, a state trooper was outside my door. Without hesitation, I left him in, and we discussed everything. Whether it was the color of his shirt, or if he had sweat from his brow. But that's when he got the transmission over the radio, "Suspect's been found." They found him on a dirt road about 3 miles from the murder house, dead in his car. He shot himself in the head. He still had the gun with him. He could have killed me. I could have been one of his victims. It's been years, but I still get nightmares. No one in this family really talks about it anymore. We have put it all behind us, but the fact I was around him after he did such heinous things is just unbelievable. I slept in the same house as a killer and didn't even know it. And that's what scares me the most. I live in a pretty major UK city and moved here when I was a student 7 years ago. In my second year of university, I was living with 3 other girls in a little house, an area that has really dodgy outskirts, known for crime, the kind of place where students are warned to stay by the main road at night. A few roads away from me was a street that had become infamous for rapes and sexual assaults that year. There was supposedly a guy or a gang of guys on the loose, and the story was constantly being covered on the news at the time. So one morning, I set off for university at around 8:30 a.m. It was a nice sunny spring morning, and I had my music player on and my iPhone. I walked from my house into the back of a car park with a large supermarket on the main road. As I was walking up the slope leading alongside the supermarket to the street, the bus to the university stopped just outside the shop. I became aware of someone walking behind me. I immediately took one earphone out as I looked at him through my peripheral view. He had a bike, so I assumed he wanted to get past, and I hung back for a bit. He stopped and I got a proper look at him. He was dark-skinned, around 35, and extremely fat. Not in a horrible way. I don't usually notice stuff like that, but he is by far the biggest person I have ever seen with my own eyes. Anyway, I thought you were Sarah. I'm Tony. Oh no, I'm not. I laugh awkwardly and start walking away as alarm bells were ringing. As I said, this is the kind of place where you don't chat to random blokes. He speeds up to walk alongside me, asking me questions about where I go out clubbing. when I'm next going out, what I like drinking. I humor him as the main road was like 100 meters away, and there were people anyway. I'm just kind of giving him quick answers and give up on my music by unplugging my iPhone, stuffing my headphones in my pocket. Can I have your number? Sorry, I'll give you my number. So he reads me his number out, and I just put it in, thinking that will be that. Okay, now ring it. I know I should have said I don't have credit or whatever, I know. But in the weirdness of the moment, I did it. Then I said I had to go, and walked quickly around the side of the building to the main road, and went straight into the supermarket, as I didn't want to have to wait by the bus stop with him there. I looked behind me and saw him locking his bike up outside the entrance, so I quickly ducked down an aisle, went around the back of the supermarket, and popped up at the end of the other aisle to look at the entrance. Guess who was walking along checking the aisles? I darted across, used the checkouts lining the other side of the shop as cover, and somehow made it back outside. There was no bus. I stood close to a group of people waiting, keeping an eye on the shop entrance. Tony appeared and smiled this massive, toothy grin at me. The bus arrived and I jumped on, relieved to be finally free of him. Then the phone calls started. By the time I had gotten to university 30 minutes later, I had about 5 missed calls and a voicemail. I go into my class and immediately told my friends Alex and Gaz. I was kind of laughing it off at this point, and the whole class was listening in to the voicemails, and it was all a bit of a joke. What did he look like? Alex asked. I told her that he's around 35 and morbidly obese. She asked whether I've seen the local newspapers today. The police have released an e-fit of one of the suspected rapists in the areas. Mid-30s, dark-skinned, and extremely fat. So now things take a more sinister turn, and it's no longer funny as the calls and the voicemails rack up even more. By midway, I had 11 missed calls and 4 emails, all mentioning the club night he was talking about. When can he take me there, etc. I decided to call the police, and they came to my house that afternoon. He actually phoned while they were there, and the policewoman answered it. After taking down all the details, they left and promised to be in touch. The next day, a cop in plain clothes comes up. Tony was a convicted rapist, and they had him in the police station. The name Tony and the number I had given them checked straight out of the records and led them to his door. Never heard anything else from him or the situation. Ironically, I have recently moved to the infamous Rape Road. Although within a 10-second walk from the main road, Tony, whoever you are, please, let's not meet ever again.
To clarify, I was naive, sheltered, and only 14, so one day I went to this chat site because I remember I was having a hard time falling asleep, and it was like really late into the night. I thought talking to some strangers might help me doze off. Anyways, I was on there for maybe about 15 minutes when I got a private message. I remember his name to this day. It was something like Loving Dad or Lovely Dad or something like that. He introduces himself and says his real name and asks me for my information. I tell him my real age and my real name. I remember we were talking about Disney movies, nothing creepy, and he was funny. So I felt like maybe he was a good guy. Wrong. So we end up innocently talking for like an hour. Never did I think of asking his real age. And I don't think I even really cared. But I was finally getting sleepy and I told him I had to go to bed. But he really wanted to stay in contact with me, so I didn't see why not. After all, we spent an entire hour just talking about movies. And he knew a great deal of details about them, so I thought he was my age. Anyways, I give him my Skype, and for the next week, we continue talking. We both cammed, and then I saw how older he looked. Then I thought, oh shit, It turns out he was looking for a young girl to do God only knows what with him. Creepy pervert from Skype. Let's never ever meet, or I will make sure you rot in prison until the day you die.
A year ago, I was coming back home late at night from then my boyfriend's place. He lives in a few cities over, about a 50-minute drive. I was coming home late around 3 a.m. We both live in major cities, so the roads were well lit, and I didn't get through any shady areas. Also, I'm a young woman in my early 20s, so this experience is especially scary. As I get off the highway close to my place, I am stopped at a red light with another car. It was a black SUV. The car is a little bit ahead of me in the lane beside me, so the front of my car is closer to the back end of that car. As I get off the highway close to my place, I am stopped at a red light with another car. It's a guy in a black SUV. He is a little bit ahead of me in the lane beside me, so the front of my car is closer to the back end of his car. He rolls down the window and sticks his head out and looks at me for about 5 seconds. He looks to be mid-20s, early 30s, Middle Eastern looking man with a buzz cut. He puts his head back in his car and rolls up the window. Okay, so that was weird, I think to myself. I kind of glance at his license plate and notice it's a custom one. It was unique and memorable. This will be important later on. I try not to think much of it and carry on my way. I notice my gas is low, so I head to the gas station close to my place. I see his car in my rear view mirror and notice he turns off into another major road heading the opposite of where I was ahead, so I was relieved. When I get gas and headed down the main road to my house, I'm driving for 5 minutes and I'm literally 2 minutes away from my house. I see a car nearly rear-end me, flashing its high beams at me like mad. I look at my dashboard to see if I mistakenly left something on open and checked my side mirror to see if my gas hatch was open. Perhaps this person was trying to warn me or tell me something, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I go a little faster and turn on to another main road to see if he'll follow me, and he's still right on my tail. I'm panicking at this point and zoom right past my house. No way I was going to lead him to where I lived. He's still chasing me and high beaming me like crazy. Thoughts were racing through my mind, like, oh my god, this is how I am going to die. As I turn onto another main road, I scramble for my phone so I can call 911. This guy comes from behind me to right next to my car. I feel him glaring at me. I force myself not to look. I don't want to see this nasty person's face. I bring my phone to my ear and the 911 operator picks up. I'm stuttering my words to this woman, telling her that there was a psycho chasing me and that he was trying to kill me. I tell them to come quick. The woman tells me to stop and park my car. I said there was no way I was going to do that because he was still chasing me. What if then I stop, he stops and gets out of his car? Then what? After about 30 seconds, she convinced me to pull over, and I felt that if I wanted help, I should comply. At this point, we were going about 110 miles per hour in a 60-mile-per-hour zone. So I hit the brakes and his car flies forward. I see the license plate and it's the same guy from when I got off the highway. I took note of the car make, color, and remembered his face. I see his brake lights come on. I can tell he was thinking about whether he should turn around and continue chasing me. He decides against it and speeds off. I'm almost in tears at this point, giving the operator the play-by-play about what is happening. I pull into this neighborhood side street and explain to her all the details of the car and person, and she says it's not found. I give her different variations of it, and still nothing. She says I can wait in the neighborhood for the police to come to file a report, but that'll take 20 minutes. It was nearly 4 a.m. at this point, and I was tired. I decided against it and went home. I don't know what would have happened if I stopped for him,
or worse, went home. Disgusting car chaser. Let's not meet ever again. I was hanging out with my friends, just a typical Saturday night, and around 12:30 a.m. I went back to my friend's house just to smoke some weed. So after a bit, I decided to walk home from his house. It's only a few minutes walking distance away, so around 1:30 a.m. I start trekking in the cold and dark night to go home. But I wasn't too worried because the city I live in is pretty safe. When I'm about halfway home, a taxi van slows down and drives by me, going the same way I was. It makes a U-turn in front of me, drives by me again, honks, drives past me, and makes another U-turn behind me. And this time, they come up to a complete stop. I didn't get to see the driver, but the passenger was between a 25 to 30-year-old male and proceeds to shout, "Hey, sexy, you look hot. Want to come to a party?" Aside from the fact that this was creepy, I found it strange, for I was literally wearing my dad's sweater, my dad's jacket, plain black leggings, and big winter boots. I instantly freeze and think for a second maybe he thinks I'm a prostitute. But prostitution isn't common at all where I live, for it's not a big city, and it's a very cold night during this time of year. After about 20 seconds of us just looking at each other, and me frozen in fear, I can't think of what to do, but just kept walking home in hopes that they'll drive away. Of course, it didn't work out that way. They speed up, and the man gets outside of the van and starts running towards me. I instantly take off, but running in deep snow boots is quite hard. So what do? I take off both of my boots, carry them, and continue sprinting for my life. I turn, and instead of going home, I'm just twisting and turning through the streets, while this guy is kind of staggering. I assume he was some sort of drug addict or alcoholic, and the taxi is speeding much faster. I can't think of what to do except run through the graveyard nearby, run to the forest behind it, and there I run along the paved trail in the forest until I get home, which took me longer, but I lost them. I rush inside, lock the doors and the windows. I sit in my living room all night with a knife in my hand. Why I didn't call the police, I don't know. I was still stoned, and so not really thinking clearly. Also, my mom wasn't in town, so I was home alone. I eventually fell asleep for a while, and when I woke up in the morning, I called the police and told them everything that happened. They didn't find anything but said they'd get back to me if they did. This happened a while back. I went through a bit of a stoner phase. Me and a friend of mine would meet up at night on occasion to smoke weed after getting off of work. We would chat, smoke, listen to music in his car, and then go back to our houses as the high wore off. This one particular night, he picked me up around 10:30 p.m. and parked his car at a popular local park. Rather than smoking, we took marijuana-infused candy. We sat in the car with music playing loudly as we were slowly getting higher and higher as the edibles kicked in. Our attention to the car's surroundings had, by this point, fully dissipated, and we were shocked as we saw two dark figures jump out from the right side of the vehicle and start running forward through the parking lot. As they started running, a large SUV with the truck already open quickly drove in front of them. The two figures hopped in and shut the door to the trunk of the car as it slid away from the park. Despite how idiotic it sounds now, we both had a bit of a laugh after they drove away, figuring it was just some teenagers fucking around. About 30 minutes passed and we had forgotten about it, due to our then currently altered states of mind. We had yet again stopped paying attention to our surroundings. A few cars had driven in and out of the parking lot since then, and we had never bothered to look at them too closely. As our high was at its peak and intensity, I suddenly noticed in the side mirror that the SUV that had sped away earlier was parked directly behind us with its lights off. I'm pointing this out to my friend. He looked pretty nervous, but began trying to rationalize it, saying that it might just be a different car after all, or maybe that they just wanted to park for a bit like we were at the time. We both got a bit creeped out and decided to start driving off, and then the SUV behind us starts its engine and began to follow us. It was about midnight by this point, and there were no other cars on the road, so they just kept on following us. We kept turning onto different roads throughout the quiet residential neighborhood we found ourselves in. We were trying desperately to see if we could lose them, but they were a mere car length behind us the whole time. We were driving aimlessly for about 10 minutes. Panicking at this point, we decided our best option would be to drive somewhere where we might encounter other people. We made our way to a local grocery store at the nearest strip mall, parking next to the only other car in the lot, and my friend was terrified of the idea of being chased while stoned on a busier road in the middle of the night. As we parked the car started to rapidly circle ours over and over again. They did this for about 15 minutes. Eventually, one of them opened the sunroof and poked his torso out and began yelling at us. The man was white, average-sized, and appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He kept repeating something along the lines of, "We're gonna kick your fucking ass, you fucking faggots," as he made obscene gestures directed at us. This was accompanied by everybody else in the car yelling and trying to intimidate us. I could make out the voices of the 3 or 4 other people. I was positive that at this point they were waiting for one of us to snap and exit our vehicle. Me and my friend were ferociously debating as to if we should call the cops or not. My friend was hesitant due to his somewhat intoxicated state and was worried he could get into trouble with the police. We waited for another 5 minutes as they did this until we saw a rather beefy and muscled man exit the grocery store with shopping bags in his hands, heading towards the car parked alongside us. He began to unlock his car. I bolted out of my friend's car and quickly explained the situation to the man. He quickly noticed the SUV circling us. The man sticking out of the SUV saw that we were no longer alone. He ducked back into the car as he drove off down the road. The man seemed sympathetic to the situation we found ourselves in and waited with us for a few minutes until we were sure the SUV wasn't coming back. Me and my friend drove around for a little bit to make sure we were definitely not being followed again, and he soon dropped me off at my house. I cut my cannabis use drastically since that night, and my friend quit entirely. It was probably the most scared both of us had ever been in our lives. Car full of possibly homophobic stalker maniacs. I hope I never meet any of you again.
This happened when I was 18 years old, and in a deep conflict with where I was going in life and who I was with, and who I was. That being said, I tried really hard to have friends, and would often overlook a lot of things for the sake of companionship. I was working in a deli at a local co-op and typically worked closing shift. Usually nights were pretty slow and we had a total of 5 people dispersed around the deli after 9 p.m. One night I was working the deli case when the overnight dishwasher approached me. Tom was about an inch or so taller than me, with greasy hair and a ponytail, and from what my coworker said, an odor that traveled with him. I would often catch him standing in the hallway that led to the dish pit, just staring at me. He stared at me just a little too long after he came up to me and asked if I wanted to get high and watch Monty Python at his place. The fact that I was stoned made me slightly less alarmed and more humored that he stared at me for such long periods of time, but I wasn't interested in doing drugs in a secluded place with someone I barely knew. Being anxious and trying to be polite, I gave him my Facebook instead of my number, knowing it would say I was in a relationship and I would not have to blurt it out that I had a boyfriend. He apologized and said he did not know and he would not have asked me out if he did. I said I would be happy to be friends, but I did not feel comfortable going to his house alone when I did not know him that well. He then asked how I was supposed to get to know him at work because he had to stay in the back. We would eventually start to take breaks at the same time. We talked a lot about our lives and the heavier things from our past. I talked about my past abuse and he talked about struggling with drug issues and the law. We would sit outside on summer nights while he smoked and I watched the stars and we'd talk about philosophy and our ambitions. We had some very thoughtful conversations, although he seemed a lot more interested in my reactions to what he said than what I said. We also messaged on Facebook frequently. He was overtly sexual and a lot of his topics of conversation, but I knew he did not have many friends to talk to, especially about his girlfriend. He occasionally made sexual comments about me, but they were mostly harmless at the beginning. He also would constantly ask me if I found him attractive. When I talked to him about it, he said he had a problem with boundaries and was insecure, but would try harder and that he was sorry. One night we hung out with a group of coworkers after work. He offered to drive me and my coworker. I accepted because I would not be alone with him, and because parking at my complex became scarce late at night. We met up with other people there and had a decent night. He was conscious about making sure I was comfortable and got me home safely. A week passed without many noteworthy events, but one night my friend and I were at the beach. It must have been around 12 or 1 a.m. when I got a text from Tom asking how to make French fries because he was too drunk. I asked my friend if she wanted to meet him and potentially get French fries, and she agreed, so we drove over. When we arrived, the stove was on with nothing on it. He was stumbling all over, and his girlfriend was drunk and naked in the other room. He said he wanted to go to the beach too and drive to get French fries, so we took him to get food and go to the beach with us. Tom spent the whole night asking how kinky I was, if I had ever gotten a rim job, and saying that he imagined bending me over the salad bar and saying what else he wanted to do to me. I drove him home and brushed it off, yet again assuming it was more the alcohol than him. He then progressively got worse. During one of our chats, he casually mentioned he could kill someone and feel nothing. He would flick his tongue at me when I walked by and said he wanted to change his tongue piercing to a vibrator. He would tell me what he was into and claim it was friendly and platonic, and he was not interested in me at all. Now I know what you are thinking, but sadly, I'm just as naive as the dumb person in horror movies that yell hello and walk into the darkness looking for answers. However, this is where it all starts to click in my head. Our mutual friend and coworker, Scott, overheard me talking to my friend about how everything I explained how Tom is crossing a line. Tom simply apologizes and keeps doing said creepy thing. Scott looked at me and asked, "Are you talking about Tom?" Slightly ashamed. I said yes. Scott pulls me aside and tells me in a hushed voice that Tom wanted to hang out and Scott had immediately forgotten and took a shower. When he got out of the shower, Tom was just sitting in his house waiting for him. Scott and I kept our distance from him outside of work, but made occasional small talk while we worked with him. I remained unnerved that he knew where I lived. I remained unnerved every night when I covered the salad bar and could feel a gaze. About a week or so later, he got a new girlfriend, and his harassment died down a little. It was less verbal and more just strange looks and staring at me. When I offered one of my male coworkers a ride home, Tom stared at me the whole rest of the night until we left. A different night, I gave another one of my male coworkers my number and told him we should hang out sometime. Sometime after that, I was in the back gathering supplies to stock the espresso bar. and Tom came up to me and cornered me. He started asking why I gave my coworker my number and asking if I wanted to have sex with him. I politely responded that it was friendly and pushed him back. I could always feel him watching me. About a night later, I was talking to that same coworker when Tom interjected and said, and I quote,
"Do you know what the difference between sexual harassment and what I do to you is?"
That was the last straw that broke the camel's back, and I reported it to management and blocked him the next day. He was talked to and told he could not talk to me at work unless it was about work and work only. Management decided it was a good plan against my wishes to have this talk right before we started our shift together. Scott ended up coming in and standing by to make sure nothing happened. He claimed he had no clue why I reported him and called me a bitch to our mutual friends. He also quit about a week later because there were too many dishes. Thanks for the nightmares of bringing up past trauma I told you about, Tom. Let's not meet again. So for context, my front door faces the corner of the house, and I could see part of the front and the backyard. One of the wilder memories I have of my neighbor Beth is when her youngest son, Damien, came over and shyly knocked on the door. I was the one to answer and looked down at him and asked him what's up. He looks up at me and says, "Can I borrow your phone?" Barely as soon as the words left his mouth, something catches my eye and I focus over his shoulder to see Frank fly back and land on the ground. I hear an angry yell, and Louis rushes out and punches Frank. By now, Mom can hear the fighting and starts to call 911 and stand next to me to watch. Frank shows Louis away, and just then, Beth runs out and starts shrieking at Frank to stop. He swoops down and gets a brick from their stepping path and throws it at her. He missed. Beth stopped screaming, and Louis tries to punch Frank again, and then Frank grabs Damien's skateboard and flung it at him. He missed again, and the skateboard went through the front window, breaking it. There's more screaming, but then Frank runs back towards the house, snatches Damien's baseball bat, and jumps through the broken window and disappeared into the house. Beth and Louis both come over, and we waited for the cops. We started hearing repeated shattering noises, things getting broken, impact sounds. The police come, and he splits once more where he hopped the brick wall into my yard, and then the people behind me. Once the cops confirmed that he was arrested, Damien, Louis, and Beth head back inside. Not too long after, Damien comes back over while Louis and Beth were giving their statements. He looks absolutely crushed. I asked him what was broken, and what he told me broke my heart. My computer tower, my monitor, my TV, and the Xbox 360. I couldn't believe it. What a scumbag. Beth told me later that Frank said he did it because Damien had asked us to call the cops. He was also coming down from a bender on cocaine, which explains, well, everything. So this is a few summers back. I was visiting a friend in Norway. He was a great host and took me out to Oslo. We were at the outdoor bar having a couple of drinks. Anyway, we were sitting there chatting and catching up. I had to fly tomorrow, and he was my 6 a.m. ride to the airport. So we were very slowly nursing our drinks, and flying hungover is actually the 7th level of hell. As it gets later and later, the bar we are sitting at is getting more and more turned up. Lights go down, music ramps up, gets more and more crowded. We actually were about to finish up our drinks and head out. I see a couple of guys chatting up some very attractive young ladies directly across from me. Since it's an outdoor bar, a lot of people are smoking, which is weird considering Norway has some of the most incredible air quality ever. One of the guys takes out a cigarette and then asks the girl he is speaking to for a light. As she looks in her purse for the lighter, I see his hands flash out over her drink. It was a dark drink like Jack, so I couldn't be sure if he dropped anything in there. But I just thought better be safe than sorry. She hands them the lighter and picks up her drink. I interrupt my friend mid-sentence and go over there and say something along the lines of, "I think he put something in there." Neither of them speak English, so I have to enlist my friend to come over and explain it. in Norwegian. The guy instantly gets defensive and tells me to mind my own business. Then he starts calling me names and says I'm racist. So my friends tell him if there's nothing in the drink, then swap with her. At first he protests, and then the young lady tells him that it's a great idea and puts the drink in his hand. He glares at us and pours it out on the floor. The woman had a look of shock on her face and left without saying anything, and the guy went into the crowd and disappeared before we could track down a bouncer.
I am not sure why my parents allowed these guys to live with us now that I think about it, but the guy had always been nice to me and my brother, kind of like kooky uncles, and my dad had been friends with them since he was a kid. Anyway, when he left a book called The Necronomicon. I was a kid. I didn't have a clue what it was. We were moving too, so my dad just threw it in the yard sale we were having. It's getting late in the day. Mom and Dad are packing what is left of the yard sale stuff away when this creepy guy walks up and just starts looking through the stuff. He's talking to himself and just looks like something out of an End of Days movie. We'd seen him before, but he had never gotten this close. He picks the Necronomicon up and proceeds to tell my dad about how he is into the devil and wants to buy the book. The whole time, just eyeing me and my brother. My dad snatches the book from him and tells him to leave. He isn't selling the book to him. Guy gives him odd stare, does his slow walk off, talk to himself thing. I'm a kid and forget about the whole thing right away. Fast forward to a week later, and the guy is back. Just come up to our door and knocks. My dad opens it and he leans in and looks around, sees me, and his eyes just light up. Starts telling my dad that he saw a picture of me at this circus and he wanted to take me to see it. I'm a little kid, just excited at the idea of a circus and there being a picture of me there. I'm jumping up and down asking to go. My dad tells me there is no circus and there is no picture. Pushes the guy off the porch and tells him that if he ever comes near us again, he would kill him. We moved soon after that, but I still went to the same school. For a week straight, I noticed a girl I used to live with across the street from the trailer park wasn't at school. When I did see her again, she didn't look the same. She was quiet and withdrawn. Later, I found out that the very same man who had been trying to take me to the circus had molested her. I'm sorry if this is all over the place. It happened over 20 years ago, and much of my childhood was crazy like this. I am glad my dad was there, and to the man who wanted to show me my picture, I'm glad we never met again.
I am a 21-year-old senior in college, living with 3 other girls, in an old one-story house. We are located about a 15-minute walk from the main campus, and the majority of our neighbors are college students. That being said, this town is notorious for being a little well-known. Sketchy. Millie is home to one of the first insane asylums built in America. After the majority of it being closed down, abandoned for years, the final building was shut down about a month ago and the remaining patients were released. Now, I doubt this is directly correlated with my creepy experience, but I am not the only one who has interesting encounters with strangers since the release of this town. 2 nights ago, after getting off of work around 11:30, I came home to my roommates getting ready to go for a night out. I realize now how stupid it was, but we often had an open door policy, free for anyone to come over and visit as they please. We would lock the door at night, but the one time we forgot really came to bite us in the ass. Around midnight, I was hopping in the shower as my roommates were headed out the door. We said our goodbyes. I would be meeting up with them later. I had just stepped out of the shower when I heard what sounded like the front door slamming shut. I automatically assumed one of the girls had forgotten something, so I called out their names. No response. I then hear footsteps in the hallway.
I call again, no response. Fear and dread came over me, and I immediately grabbed my clothes and ran into the bathroom. I threw my clothes on, leaned my ear to the door, and waited in silence to hear if someone was in the house. I hear nothing. I decided it must have been one of my roommates grabbing something and leaving again. So I head into the living room to get my phone. 6 missed calls, and it's still ringing. My roommate, Carrie, was on the other end. I answered and immediately could hear the panic in her voice. Lee, are you in the house? Yes. Why? You need to get out of there. Sam drove by and said he saw a man walking through the front door. He called the police, but you need to leave. I shit my pants. Nothing was going through my head besides pure adrenaline and fear. I was not sure of the man's intentions, but I sure wasn't going to wait to find out. While remaining on the phone with my roommate, I bolted out the front door and hid behind my car. I watched the house from afar, waiting anxiously to see any movement. As my friends approached in a truck, I sprinted out from behind my car and jumped into the back of their truck bed. Just as I did, a dark figure scurried into the woods running in the opposite direction. I can only assume he was inching closer to me as I was waiting for them to arrive. I screamed, bloody murder, and we floored it out of there. I refused to go back into the house until the police arrived, and it had been triple checked. There were no signs of anything being touched or stolen. Which makes me wonder what the man's intentions were. You can guarantee that I have locked the door every night since, and to the stranger who walked into my house while I was in the shower, let's not meet. I am a quiet loner and like to go on walks just to get some me time. This one night on the 27th of November, I decided to go on another lengthy walk of mine. There was something eerie this time, though, as I had a feeling that the 27th of November is a night that something grotesque was going to happen, and boy, was I right. So at around 2 a.m., I was restless and made my way into the cold night with that same feeling of dread I had earlier on in the day. The first hour of my walk was pretty normal and nothing out of the ordinary, but lo and behold, I had a feeling I was being watched. Bearing in mind that it was about 3 a.m. now, and I was sitting on a bench that was in a park that wasn't very well lit. Someone else being in the park was very unlikely, as it's a small town and the only people who would be around at this time are drunk pissheads. There was no sound coming from the dark figure that caught my eye. He was just standing there, staring in my direction. I looked down at my phone to put my touch light on and pointed my light towards the dark figure, but to my surprise, he had vanished. Me just being paranoid and extremely tired, I just ignored the weird encounter and decided it would be best to make my way home and get some shut-eye. Placing my phone back in my pocket and lighting up another cigarette, I made my way back to my house, but still had this uneasy feeling of someone watching me. I am normally not easily scared, but this felt different, like someone had decided to taunt me. I looked behind me to see the same dark-figured man standing right beside a tree, just looking my way. Now I know this isn't just something my mind had made up. I shout to the figure, "Hey man, is there a problem?" You could tell there was fear in my voice, but I wasn't going to let this creep get the best of me. No response from him. This was just getting weird now. I stood there with my eyes widened. The man got to the floor and started crawling towards me in a manner I could only describe as insane. The only thing I could hear was this hissing noise, which I presumed was coming from him. I just stood there, wondering what on earth he was going to do to me. But in my current state, I just looked at him with fear. As he edged closer, I vaguely noticed something was dangling from his rucksack. I guessed that it was some sort of bird, or some sort of small creature.
Anyway, I did not want to hang around to find out, so I dashed up a small lane right behind to my house. Looking back on the ordeal, maybe I should not have headed straight back to my house, as he would know where I lived. But my head was in a messed up place from all the fear this man had caused me. I ran through my gate to my front door and quickly glanced behind me to find him just standing outside my closed gate. One thing the man said to me will always send chills down my spine to this day. He muttered the words,
"One day we will meet again, and this time you'll be coming home with me."
The events of this night stopped me from going on walks because I still, even to this day, 5 years later, fear that he will come back and take me to some sinister place where he could do whatever the hell he wants to me. So creepy man from the park, let's not meet again.
I was 10 years old, lived in the deep south. Me and my parents lived in the woods, in a little house a couple of miles from the tiny little town where I grew up. To get to our house, you had to turn down a paved road, travel approximately a mile, and we lived in the woods down a short dirt road to the left. There were other homes sort of nearby, but woods separated all of us, so there was lots of privacy. It was summer. I was bored because until I learned to drive, my summers were incredibly boring. My mom was not sociable, so I only had company or visited rarely, and we went to church and we went shopping once a week in the nearest major city. But other than that, me and my mom just stayed at home, alone. In this little town, most people didn't even lock their doors. It was and still is probably one of the safest towns in America. So in the summer, we would have the doors open and windows open, nothing locked, never dreaming that our safety could be threatened. One day, my uncle, his wife, and 3 kids showed up. His kids were my age, and I was excited. My mom never looked forward to these visits. She just was not social, and our house was tiny. The kids had to camp out in the living room. She knew my uncle was coming, but he wasn't due for another couple of weeks, but for some reason he decided to come early. It was summer evening. Me and my 3 cousins were out running around in the yard, playing like kids do, when my cousins got to arguing. My uncle was in the living room. He called them in and made them sit down for a while, until they could learn to behave. I stayed outside and practiced cartwheels, something I was desperately trying to learn before school started back. I noticed that this big guy came walking into the yard. He was carrying a limb. He walked up on the porch and knocked on the screen door. My mom came to the door and he told her he was lost. He said he was staying with some people and he wasn't from here, and he went to the store with them and they drove off and left him, and he didn't know how to get back to their house. My mom, she told him that she would call this lady that lived down the road from us and asked if our teenage sons would drive down and pick him up and help him get back to where he was staying. My mom left him standing on the porch and walked away to make the phone call, and he did something that I thought was a little strange. He opened the screen door and stuck his head in, looking around. Of course, he saw my uncle, who was this big, strong, stocky guy sitting on the couch. Mom called this lady. Her boys drove up and got him pretty quickly, and he was gone. We didn't think much of it until my uncle and family left because we were too busy and I was having fun. But after my uncle's family left at the end of the week, we found out some things. First of all, we found out this guy was not lost at all. A relative that lived at the end of the road where you turn off to head toward our house. Said he's seen that guy walk past his house 2 or 3 times in a row. And he would stay for a while, then he would walk back by. Then the lady whose son gave this guy a ride, she called my mom a few days after this happened, and she said he told her sons exactly how to get to where he was staying. She also told my mom that me and her needed to stay in the house and keep the doors locked because this young man was up to no good. I believe he had been watching and saw a petite woman and a little girl home alone all day with doors unlocked and unassuming of danger. Anyway, I've always wished my mom would have asked these boys' mother why she felt that this guy was dangerous to us, but my mom just didn't. But anyway, creepy stranger who came into our yard that day, let's never meet again. My story takes place 19 years ago. I am a female and I was 16 at the time. I like to think that I am strong, but I couldn't take on 2 young men, so it begins with my mother and stepfather, and leaving my 17-year-old sister and I alone. They did this quite often. My parents were not winning any parenting awards. My sister and I didn't get along either. She was a nasty piece of work. Luckily, she decided to go stay at a friend's house while my parents were away. I was nervous about being alone, so I had my boyfriend staying with me. He was a dickhead, but I'm glad he was there. One night, Brett and I were at my house, and we had just started messing around when I heard a really loud knock at the door. My mom was in the basement, but at the landing area between the stairs. There was a window that I could see the stairs that led up to our front porch. I could see 2 people standing there, and just as I was peeking out to see them better, one of them saw me. I remember feeling the breath sucked out of my chest. There were 2 young men. It was almost midnight, and I had no idea who the hell they were. The guy that saw me let his friend know, and they both looked in the window and asked me to come to the door. My boyfriend had gone upstairs to open the door, and I remember freaking out because I had told him not to. He was one of those guys that thought he was a tough guy and believed he could beat up anyone. He was telling the guys to leave just as I joined him at the door. They saw me and called me by my name and asked me to let them in. Brett told them to fuck off. One guy, I think he said his name was West or Les or something like that, said, "Come outside. We just want to talk to you," to my boyfriend. I said, "No thanks. We are going to bed," and shut the door. I was really confused and getting very frightened. They stood at my doorstep for a few minutes, then started knocking around. Wes explained to me through the door that he was my sister's friend, and that she had told him I was alone at home, and that they should come by. I knew my sister and I believed them. They did not, however, make me stupid. I told them to leave. They started kicking the door. It was shaking, and I seriously feared that it would not hold up. I was so scared that I ran into my kitchen to call the police. I was assured that they would be there very soon and to lock the doors, and they stayed on the phone. Meanwhile, Brett was still yelling at them, which only served to piss these guys off more. I begged him to shut up, but he would not listen to me. I was locking all the doors and windows upstairs while Brett went down to check the doors. Down in the basement there was a huge mudroom area. It had a thick wooden door made of 2x4 planks, kind of like a barn door. The door had a big old lock on it, some spring-loaded turnbolt, and also had a plank to set across it, like a barricade. One of the guys was pounding on this door, and Brett heard him tell the other guy to go try the back door. This stupid door was one of those 1960s things that had a happy little square window right in the face level with a little curtain across it. I was at this door, trying to jam a chair under the flimsy knob, while I looked up and saw the unnamed guy just looking at me. I screamed, and the dispatcher asked me if I was okay. I barely squeaked out that one of the guys was looking right at me through the window. He was older than me, probably about 20, and he was tall, and he looked scary as hell. His dark eyes were drilling into me, and he wore this creepy, placid smile on his face. I had never seen this man before, but he knew me by my name. He tapped on the window with his finger, never breaking eye contact, and said, "Becky, let me in." I couldn't breathe. The knob was rattling as he was messing with it. He said again, "Let me in, Becky. I just want to see if you are okay. I just want to talk to you." He stared right at me. I didn't say anything. I was just 3 feet from him, with my back pressed to the refrigerator, when he suddenly started beating on the door and screamed, "Let me the fuck in this house. If I have to break in, I will kill you both. So just open the fucking door." He looked like a maniac. Then there was a loud knock at the front door, and the man went silent. He gave me the most hateful sneer I had ever seen. I heard shouting, and he ran down the back stairs and into the woods along the back of my yard. Brett had gone to the door. It was the cops. There was 2 female officers at the front door. One was just starting to raise her voice, asking where I was when I came to the door, too. I was so relieved. I started sobbing. I told them that they ran away through the woods. Luckily, the woods were not deep. They actually ran along the bank of a large river, and there was a bridge just from where the woods met the road. One officer ran around the back while one stayed to get a description and took a statement. Officer 1 came back and spoke to Officer 2. Said she saw them running across the bridge. They both left in a hurry, hopped into the cruiser, and sped off. I was still crying and shaking, but I was absolutely furious at Brett for riling them up. I went to make myself some tea, thinking of all the ways I could kill my sister when she got home. I had so much anger, fear, and adrenaline pumping through me. I could have ripped her into shreds at that moment. 20 minutes later, the cruiser came back. There were 2 guys sitting in the back seat, and the officers wanted me to confirm it was the right guys. I looked through the window and saw them. They still looked terrifying to me. They were in cuffs and could not get to me, but I would not get close to them. Neither would look at me. I confirmed it was them, and we spoke a bit. I told the cops about my sister, suggesting that these men should come see me. Officer 2 kind of mumbled, "What a bitch." I had to agree. I pressed charges for attempted forcible entry, property damage, and attempted assault. Initially, they both pled not guilty, but later admitted to some of the charges. They both got 18 months in jail and were forbidden to contact me or my boyfriend ever again, and to be at least 500 meters from me at all times. I never heard from them again. I confronted my sister about it, and of course she denied it. Then she laughed about it. She was an awful person. I have no idea what their true intentions were, as they maintained that they were just there to talk to me. I'm thankful I didn't have to find out. So 2 strange guys that came to me and that just wanted to talk, let's never ever meet again. When I was 17 years old, I was intrigued by computers and everything the internet had to offer. I soon found out about Yahoo chat rooms, back when they were used primarily. I would talk to a few people on there, including a friend I made which became a friend in real life, even to this day. So I didn't think anything bad would happen to me. No one ever thinks that, especially on the internet. I met this one guy named Daniel. At the time, he was 28 years old. Him and I became friends very quick, and I felt like I could tell him anything like I knew him forever. Our conversation would last forever, and I ended up telling him more than I probably should ever tell anyone. One of the conversations I had mentioned that I was trying to go to school to become a computer engineer and was trying to find a job in the field to better suit my understandings. He then told me he had his own computer company and that he was trying to find some help. As a naive woman who was trying to find work in her field, I wanted to take the offer. I talked to my family members about it, and despite their reasoning, I took the job offer. I will be the first to admit that my family were not strict at all. My mom did not like the idea, but she said that I was going to do it anyways, and that at least she knew where I was going. I probably would have been more grateful if she would have put her foot down. The job was located in New Jersey, and I lived in Texas. Fast forward to about 6 months later, This was when things went from good to worse. He was still trying to get his business off the ground, but kinda started slacking at it. To make extra income, I would help others that needed it with their networking and their computers. It was a way to get out of the house since I was not allowed to leave the house without his knowledge or consent. I just figured he was protecting me since I was still unfamiliar with the city. Once I turned 18 years old, things started to get even worse out of nowhere. When he would tell me how to eat my food and to be a proper lady. He would yell at me if I accidentally scraped my fork against my teeth and little things like that. He would hack into my laptop to keep an eye on me and see who I was talking to and what I was doing. Every time my family members would call me, I had to talk to them in front of him. Things started getting so bad that I started staying at work longer hours just so I didn't have to go home. I would never mention this to my coworkers because I didn't want them to pry into my business. It wasn't until later that they found out on their own. One of my coworkers has a huge crush on me and always worried about me when it was time to go home. He knew that I would rather work a double shift than go home, and that made him worried. I honestly wish I stayed in contact with him. He was one of the best friends a girl could ask for. I started getting into MMORPG games since they took me out of the reality I was living in at the moment. I met this guy on there, and it made me feel good to have someone to talk to finally. I never meant anything by it. It was just an escape. Daniel found out about the stuff I would say to him and said that I was cheating on him, which I never did such a thing. Until this moment, I never believed that he would go psychotic on me or even hurt me. I figured he would just yell at me and try to scare me. One day he got so fed up with all of it and grabbed my cell phone and broke it in half. He looked at me and said, "Now you have no way to tell your family what you did to me." I was literally terrified at this point. He threatened me a little more, and I started crying. I figured that was the end of it, but I was completely wrong. The next day, I packed a small bag and told him that my job would allow me to do some book work while it was slow. It was a bag of some clothes I could find in a hurry. I got to work and told my coworkers what was going on. They gave me a phone and I called my grandfather, who got me a flight to Texas as soon as he could. I was so grateful for him and everyone at work. When I got to the airport in Texas, I was greeted by my family members. I called Daniel and told him that I was in Texas and I didn't want to be with him anymore. He laughed and said, "There is no way you could have got back to Texas that fast. Come home, now." I assured him that I was not coming back to him. My mom got on the phone and told him the same. I don't know what him and my mom were talking about, but she got very angry and told him to never speak to me again and hung up. I wish I could say that that was the last time I ever spoke to Daniel, but it wasn't. My mom got a new phone to replace the one that Daniel had broken, and somehow Daniel got my number. He would call and threaten me. One time he called and my mom answered and put it on speaker. He said, "You better put her on a fucking plane back to New Jersey or I will come down there and get her myself." I almost had tears in my eyes even thousands of miles away. He still terrified me. My mom replied, "I will wait for you to come and get her. There is a body bag with your name on it." After that, the calls became less and he wasn't harassing me as much anymore. It took about 2 months for him to finally stop calling me, and I was able to move on with my life. I do not talk to people the same way I used to anymore, and I watch what I say to anyone now.
I live in a town in California. I can't tell you guys which one because I don't know if I'll regret it later or not. However, I can describe it. We're a very clean town, as in we never have any serious crime happen here, like murder or something awful that would land us in breaking news. However, when this happened, we for some reason didn't get on, even though it's a big deal. Everyone in my neighborhood know each other,
and genuinely trust each other. The people living in the house next door told my family that they would be out of town for a couple of weeks and wanted us to watch over their house while they were gone. It wasn't weird. They also gave us spare keys since they have pets in the house that they couldn't take on their trip and wanted us to feed them while they were gone. So they gave us the keys and head off the next day. The time that they were gone was normal. One of us would go over to the house and feed the pets and then leave. However, the day that they said they would be back, they didn't. Me and my family assumed that something happened with their car and that they needed time to fix it. The very next day, we find that they weren't back yet. We start to get a bit concerned, so my dad texts the neighbor's dad, but he doesn't respond. The next day, still not back. Soon, the other people in the neighborhood started noticing that they haven't came back yet. At this point, someone gets the authorities involved. They question people in the neighborhood, like where they said they were going, what car they were last seen driving in, and if any contact was made. Of course, I mentioned with my dad trying to text one of them, but not getting anything. I don't remember where, but they said they were going to Florida. A search party was made, both here and over in Florida. Days go by, nothing shows up. While this is happening, you would think that the news would be all over this, but no one comes over to report. Because of this, we have no clue where they are, or if anything new has shown up. They went on their trip in the summer of August, and now it's winter in January. I watched a lot of crime and case documentaries. I've never seen one where not only has not even one scrap of clues or evidence has shown up or not been reported by the news. I have a bad feeling that this isn't going to end well. Either they are found dead or alive, or they are never coming back. But I also feel like there is something bigger to this, like weird stuff is about to happen. So I was at the mall with my mother, and we were having a great time. I don't get to see my mother all that often. We went shopping for makeup, tried on a few dresses and some shoes. I finally decided on the dress I wanted to buy. My mother had gone to the restroom for a few minutes, so I had to wait for her to come back so that I could tell her about the dress that I wanted, since she would be the one paying for it. As I was waiting for my mother, this creepy old guy comes up to me and starts talking to me. I didn't mind at first. Then he started to say inappropriate things to me. He started talking about a bunch of perverted things he would like to do to me. I screamed for security, and the guards came over to where I was at. The man took off running. The guards asked me if I was okay, and I gave them a description of the creepy old fucker. They sent the information to the police. A few days later, on the news, that same old guy was arrested for hundreds of illegal videos on his computer, multiple accounts of sexual battery, molestation, and possibly murder. I am so glad that the guards at the mall responded so fast to my cries for help. I hate to think that I could have been his next victim. I feel terrible for all of the lives that he has destroyed. Creepy old bastard from the mall, I hope you fucking rot in hell, you scumbag pervert. It all started when my mom's mother died. My grandma had a husband, my mom's stepfather, who she married later in life. My mom didn't know him well, but thought he was an okay guy. But over time, my grandparents' relationship soured. My grandma complained that they fought all the time. There wasn't any signs the relationship was actually abusive, although in retrospect, maybe it was. Anyway, my grandma died suddenly, and my mom and I went to stay with my stepfather so we could sort through my grandma's stuff, help him with all the shit you have to take care of after a death. My mom started to notice some things didn't add up. My grandma had been healthy and active, and she just suddenly stopped breathing in her sleep. Okay, it happens, I guess. But why was my stepfather so cheerful? And why did he have an expensive vacation planned next month, booked before her death? with no ticket for my grandma, when they always vacationed together before. In a house full of disorganized clutter, isn't it convenient that he had all the relevant insurance, will, legal, etc. information already gathered neatly in a folder, which my mom was prevented from looking at? Just lots of little things that made my mom wonder. It seemed like he had prepared for a death no one saw coming. So she started asking questions, and that's when we started getting stomach aches. They happened regularly after meals and got worse towards the end of each day. Previously, my mom and my step-grandfather had alternated cooking, but he started insisting that he'd take care of all the cooking, to the point where he was aggressive about it. Being so young, my memory of all this is foggy, a mixture of my true memories and what my mom has told me. But I do have some clear memories, and one of these is my mom sat down at the table, then walked over to the counter where he was finishing the meal, unaware of her approaching. When she reached out to grab a finished dish and set it on the table, he noticed that the last minute and screamed at her, "Leave that alone! I've got it!" and snatched it away from her. She watched him carefully after that and noticed that he always seemed to fiddle with two of the dishes right before serving them, always to me and my mom. She was getting scared now, so early one morning she snuck a look at the folder of insurance and legal documents I mentioned earlier. The details are too personal to go into. What she saw there convinced her. She believes, and I do too, that my stepfather, tired of being married to someone he hated and not wanting to lose his assets in divorce, smothered my grandma to death in her sleep. When we came around and started asking questions, he poisoned us, either to kill us, to cover up the murder, or to make us sick enough that we'd want to go home to recover. I think the latter is more likely. But I was a small child, and I was getting very sick, and it would have been easy to overdose me even if he didn't intend to. My mom woke me, and we immediately fled. The stomachache stopped. A few weeks later, we broke the lease on our apartment and moved somewhere he would never find us, just in case. We never spoke to him again. I asked my mom years later why she didn't go to the police, and she said she didn't know. She was still reeling from the death of her mom, and did what felt was right at the time. So that's the story. Children are surprisingly resilient, or clueless, so this didn't really bother me when I was younger. And aside from using it every two truths and a lie game I've ever played, I didn't think about how fucked up it was until I was older. How much danger I was in, really. 20 years later, he is still alive. And where is he now? Creepy Grandpa, if you were out there, somewhere, let's not meet again.
I was hanging out at the park with a couple of friends just as we did every day after school let out, and we were pretty much doing what we always do, talking about guys, anime, and other stuff. We were sitting there on the swing smoking cigarettes and just chilling when this homeless guy comes up to us and asks for a cigarette, so I give him one out of my pack just to get rid of him, and it worked. He went about his business and walked off with a cigarette. This same thing went on for a few more days, same routine, hang out at the park, smoking, talking, etc. The same homeless guy would come up and bum a smoke from us. We'd give him one, and he'd leave, until one day, another homeless guy came up to us. This guy reeked of stale beer and piss and shit. His hair was natted up, and his beard had chewing tobacco in it. He came up to us and started talking about all kinds of gross things that he wanted to do to both of us, telling us that if he wanted to, he could have us right now. At first, we did not understand what he was talking about. I was young then, still in middle school, and though I liked boys and dated a few guys, I did not actually understand what any of it meant, or what it meant to love a guy or be intimate with a guy, and this disgusting creep
was just talking about a bunch of nasty shit. He mentioned how he had just gotten out of prison for doing something terrible. I'm not going to go into details, just know it's worse than murder. Just read between the lines and you'll understand. My friend told him to leave us alone, or she'd call the cops. He then grabbed her by her hair and started yelling at her.
"You gonna call the cops on me, you little fucking bitch?"
My friend squirmed and yelled for help.
"Oh, you're a fighter, aren't you? I like when they squirm."
And thankfully, by the will of God or pure luck, this big guy comes out of nowhere and starts beating the shit out of this homeless guy. The cops show up, and we are trying to explain to the cops that the guy was helping us, but it turns out that the big guy was a drug dealer, and the homeless man had stolen a bunch of drugs from him. So the big guy was going to kill this homeless guy. Even if the big guy's immediate intentions weren't to help two frightened middle school girls from being assaulted by a crazy drunk homeless man, we're thankful that he happened to come when he did. So to the creepy, disgusting, pedo homeless man, I hope you die in prison. Let's never meet again, because I carry a knife with me at all times, and I'll make you regret the day you were born.
I started working at my current job last spring. I would unlock the front door, disarm the alarm, walk downstairs, in the dark, unlock this cage that keeps the drunkies at the bar upstairs at night from wandering downstairs, and crawl along a long dark hallway with no windows to get to the light switch at the end of the hall. This always creeps me out, and I end up holding my eyes between my fingers like brass knuckles. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, and I live in a pretty bad neighborhood, and ninja sliding down the walls on the opposite side of whatever doorway is coming up just because it's pitch black and I am a scaredy bear. By the time I get to the end of the hall and flip on the light, my heart is always pounding out of my chest. I always struggle to find the right key to let me in the cafe. The whole situation started when Tom, a golf course employee, mentioned that he kept shutting the door between the men's locker room and the storage area that leads to the women's, and every time he would go back in there, it would be open again. This, along with some strange noises. Shortly after, someone from the golf course came over to tell me that they found someone's entire life packed away in one of their hundreds of lockers that no one uses, and they thought somebody was living in the storage room between the men's and women's bathrooms. He must have been coming in before the golf course people set the alarms, when they left in the evenings, and leaving after the cafe person would come in and turn off the alarm in the morning. So that means that every morning, as I blindly shuffled my way down that long dark hallway, alone, one of those pitch black doorways actually did have someone hiding behind it. A few days later, a red-faced, angry, bald man in a Vietnam-era Army issue glasses came into the cafe and started throwing his arms around, yelling about his stuff getting thrown out. They asked him about the contents of the locker. His answers about specific items led them to realize this was the man who was secretly living in one of the buildings. I never found out much about him, whether he was dangerous or just homeless. But watching him scream about his stuff made it clear that he wasn't 100% rational. I still work there and do a darkness shuffle down the hallway every morning when I work. And although they say everything is on the up and up with the alarms and the doors locking, it still creeps the hell out of me. A year or so ago, I found myself, along with my fiancée, the victim of the horror stories I love so much. I've been a fan of horror stories since I was a kid. Back in 2005, my boyfriend of 3 years and I broke up. I essentially had mental health issues I was struggling to accept while we were together, so we took some time apart. During the few months I modeled some blog standard modeling
and some of the nude variety. I even had a Tumblr for behind the scenes activities that I am not proud of that's now gone. I got paid well, so I thought nothing of it until I got contacted by some fans. These fans were creepy to the point that they bombarded me with comments about wanting to have sex with me, by force if necessary. But like the creeps they were, my fans tried to use this information to meet up with me. When I refused, it all took a turn, with messages and snapshots alongside spam on the other platforms. I just started to ignore them, hoping it would calm down. My ex received a lot of the usual death threats that ensued with white knighting on Tumblr, and we were both starting to get our lives in better places. Until I got a message. The message contained the name of where my ex worked. He hadn't worked there long at this point, maybe a month or so, but he didn't broadcast his job. Only friends and family knew he had it, and apparently so did my fans. When I tried to make it seem like I knew nothing to prevent any further threats, they responded with, "We could just wait around for him until after his shift," before sending me a picture of his work location. "Will you meet us now?" I pleaded and begged for them to leave me be, scared they'd actually do something. I thought it had worked, but they never responded. After making sure my ex was okay, I tried to calm down for a few days. Then came the next photo message, the bus stop my ex used to get home in the center of our city. I contacted him to find out where he was, and luckily he was on his way home a few minutes prior to that photo. I assumed they wouldn't know where to go even if they got the bus. I didn't want to scare my ex. I still loved him. I didn't want him endangered because of my stupid, naive actions. He was probably suspicious at that point, but he never said a word about it to me. A day or so later, I received a new photo message. They were on the road near his house. That made me lose it. I texted my ex, got him to lock his doors and windows. He wasn't the only one home. He lived with his family at this point, the people I used to live with, who I lived with for 2 years prior to our breakup. Not knowing at this point how they got the information, we were both honestly scared for our lives. That night, I got an unexpected Skype call from my ex. He explained to me that he had had enough, how they told him they'd hack his phone and my laptop to track us down, and how if he didn't end his life, how they'd reveal to my family and friends my private life. He apologized as he started swallowing a bunch of pills before apologizing to me for everything and hanging up. I truly believed my ex had gone to kill himself until I received a text from his old phone, a number he hadn't used in years. He told me how he was okay and how he had to fake his death to keep them away. I played along, even to the point of messaging these fans, telling them I was going to the police, and how I'd tracked them down, how they killed my baby's father. I told them I was pregnant to see if that would get them to calm down, to no avail. They apologized for my loss and disappeared after that. Until the end of last year, my ex and I, after this disaster, got back together since we both knew living without each other wasn't an option. We got engaged and started looking for a place to live. Usual adult decisions. One day, in October, I got a message on my personal Instagram. "We're still watching." Since that point, I've made sure we have been careful about what we post. We have changed devices and got rid of our webcams. To my fans, if you ever see this, Let's never meet.
I lived in a rural area. Nothing but cow pastures and farms for miles. The nearest city was about 3 miles from where I lived. Living in this area, you either worked on a farm or you traveled the 3 miles into the city for work. I was a stay-at-home mother at the time, and nobody had ever bothered me or my family. My husband thought that we would be safe while he went to work at a small computer repair shop in the city. Oh, how I wish he would have been right. My son was only 3 years old at the time, and since we lived in a relatively secluded area, I thought that he would be safe while he played with the baby goats that we kept in the backyard. I should have known something was wrong when he came running through the back door one day screaming and crying about one of the baby goats being gone. He was very easy to calm down whenever he got worked up, but for some reason, today was not one of his good days. My husband was going to be working late tonight and wouldn't be home for several hours. Even though we lived in a secluded area, the phone calls from scammers and telemarketers were very frequent. Today was one of the days where the phone just rang nonstop. I was already frustrated with not being able to calm my son down, and the phone ringing wasn't making it any better. After the third or fourth call, I answered every call with an obvious tone of disdain. The tone of my voice seemed to end the rapid string of phone calls. All of a sudden, I hear the goats going absolutely crazy outside, so I had to go investigate. My son stayed in the living room, watching his cartoons and eating his favorite snack, Pop-Tarts and chocolate milk. I was sure that he would be safe while I was out back investigating whatever caused the goats to lose their minds. When I went outside, I saw a man standing in our pasture, just staring directly at my house. Of course, being the only one that was home with my son, I was immediately terrified. I ran back into the house and the man began to pursue me. When I got inside, I was able to lock the door before he could get in and call the police. It seemed like an eternity before the cops showed up to take the man away. Disturbing man that was terrorizing my animals. Let's never, ever meet again.
Everything happened last year in May. At the time, I was 15 years old and was in the 10th grade at high school. My high school has an afternoon program for the 9th and 10th graders. This meant that my classes started at 12 p.m. and I sometimes finished at 5 or 6 p.m. For 3 days on the 25th, the 26th, and the 27th of May, I have been attending a convention, East European Comic Con, which was really far away from home, on the other side of the city. To get there from home, I had to use the subway and the bus. Because the first day of the convention was the 25th, a Friday, I went directly from my high school with my best friend Mary, and stayed only 2 to 3 hours. I did not want to come home late, and I was really exhausted because I finished my classes at 5:30 p.m. Everything was fine, and I came home really happy because I had lots of fun. The next day was the 26th, and it was a Saturday. Usually on the weekends, the subway, it's 10 times more empty, and the roads get busy only in the evening. I met my friend at the bus station in the morning at 9 a.m., and we went together to the convention. There we met other friends and stayed about 10 or 11 hours. She had to wait for her mom to pick her up, but my parents insisted that I had to get home using public transport. Clearly something my parents regret now. Everything was fine during the bus ride. I was listening to music, scrolling through Facebook, and just minding my own business. When I got to the subway, it was really empty. You could barely see people. It was 8 p.m. Because I had to change the through fare, I needed to walk about 5 minutes to get to the train that leads to the nearest station to my house. As I was waiting for the train, a man starts walking around me. He was in his 30s. He was looking pretty bad. He had red, puffy eyes and dirt on his hands and face. At first, he walked past me 3 times. I felt like he was walking in circles around me. As an instinct, I put my phone in my pocket and took off my headphones and unplugged them. The train arrived. It honestly felt like an eternity. I sat down and tried not to panic. He sat down right next to me. We were the only ones in the subway wagon. I thought to myself, why would he sit right next to me when there were lots of empty seats? There was an old man that was sitting at the other end of the train. I wanted to get to him so I could feel a little better and safe. As I stood up, this dude literally grabbed my hand and pulled me really hard, and I fell back on the seat. He started smiling and said, "If you do not sit right here next to me, it's going to be bad, girl." I almost started crying. I tried to stay calm. I nodded, and he let go of my hand. And this time, I looked and examined him very well. He was wearing ripped jeans and a t-shirt with holes in it, and a jean jacket. He started asking me questions. How old am I? What's my name? Where am I coming from? What do I have in my bag, etc. He was speaking aggressively, and I did not know what to do. When he saw that I am not answering, he mumbled something and then started talking about his interests, Norse gods and Norse mythology. I don't know what made him talk about this topic, but I sat there listening. It's been about 10 minutes and I felt like I had no escape. I heard footsteps, and in that moment I look up and realize that the train was almost reaching the second to last station. The footsteps were coming from the old man that I saw earlier. He looked at me and said, "Where have you been? I've been calling and texting you for hours. Come on, we need to go home." I sigh in relief. I could hear the dude mumbling something again. Just before the train stopped, he asked me if I am willing to give him my phone number so we could chat again. I told him that I could not, and that I really had to go. The old man gave him a look, and we got off the train. We started walking towards the exit, and when we saw that the train left the station, we stopped. He looked at me and said, "Is this your station? Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Is there anything I can do for you? I saw the way he pulled you and heard the way he spoke and thought you need some help." I told the old man I had exactly one more station and that I am fine, just scared. He advised me that I should talk with a security guard and tell him what just happened, so I did. I kept thanking the old man for what he had done for me. I took the next train and I texted my dad and told him to pick me up from our subway station immediately. In about 3 to 4 minutes I got off the train. I was at my station. As I was climbing the stairs to reach the exit, I heard someone yelling, "You lying bitch!" I did not have time to turn around because I was knocked down. I screamed so hard and I started crying and started to sort of move to get this man off me. Because I talked to the security guard at the other station, 2 other security guards were waiting to check on me. They were equipped with a taser. When they heard me screaming, they rushed over and helped get me up, and they pulled the man down. They told me to call the police and wait for someone to take me home. I told them that my dad was upstairs, outside the underground area. I ran so fast to my dad and told him everything, and he called the cops. The man was arrested. I am a 27-year-old female, and this happened to me when I was 24. I live in Los Angeles and have for my entire life. I was feeling lonely, so I decided to go on Craigslist to try to find someone to hang out with. Not necessarily to date, but someone to just chill with. If it led somewhere, then so be it. That was my thinking. I emailed a few guys, one of which stood out to me. He sent me some pictures, and I was fine with how he looked and he seemed nice enough. We agreed to meet and go have coffee. It took him a lot longer than he said it would to get there, and once he did arrive, I instantly regretted what I was doing. But, being overly nice, I got in his car, and instead of heading to Starbucks as we planned, he drove to a CVS. I was like, "What are you doing?" To which he said he had to return some stuff to CVS so that he'd have money. I was super uncomfortable already and just wanted to get out of there, but again, my shyness got the better of me, and I just waited it out. Once he returned whatever it was he was returning, he then said he had to stop by his apartment. We pulled into this underground garage, and he said he'd be right back. You don't know how badly I wish I had run right then while he was gone, but I didn't. He got back in his car, and I could tell right away that he was high on something. Having been to rehab before myself, it was blatantly obvious. I told him that I'd gotten an emergency phone call while he was upstairs and that I was sorry, but I had to be taken back. I told him he could just drop me off at the nearest train station. I lived in a city like an hour away, so I wasn't about to have him drive me all the way home. We got on the freeway. That was the fastest route to the main stop. But we ended up passing the exit. I told him a few miles ahead of time which one it was, but he did not say anything. He just ignored me. I thought maybe he just hadn't heard me. Hey, that was the exit, actually. You passed it, I said, instead of pulling over to the right lanes. He kept pulling further and further over to the left until we were all the way in the far left-hand lane. I asked him what he was doing, trying to keep my cool. I can't honestly remember his exact words, but it went something along the lines of, "I'm not dropping you off. We're having sex. Why do you think I did this?" I looked at him with my jaw to the ground and asked him, "So, you are refusing to drop me off?" I asked him. "Yes," he said, and then he sped up his car. The first thing I thought was obviously calling the police, so I pulled my cell out. He turned towards me and hit me in the face hard, and I dropped my phone because I was so shocked. The phone had fallen somewhere below his seat somewhere. I couldn't get to it. I was panicking. As we continued to drive, I tried desperately to think of what I should do. We came up on another interstate. For some reason, seeing the freeways intersect and seeing that we were about to get on yet another freeway was hugely ominous to me, and I decided I could not let him get on the next freeway. I couldn't get out of the car, so I did the only thing I could think of. I took a breath, grabbed the steering wheel, turning it as hard as I could to the right. He was so shocked he didn't even try to grab it back from me. As we crashed into one, then another car, and crashed into the side barrier, he turned towards me and started hitting me while screaming, "You fucking bitch! You fucked up everything!" I put my legs up to block the blows from his fist. I ended up falling backwards out of the car after managing to put my hand up and open the door. I ran to one of the cars we had crashed into that had pulled over behind us. The guy in the car had his phone out, presumably calling the cops. I knocked on his window screaming that this psycho tried to kidnap me, and he rolled it up all the way. I couldn't believe it. When I looked back, Psycho was coming towards me. So I said, "Fuck it, clearly no one is going to help," and ran towards the fence, and was even weaker because of what had happened. So literally had to lean on the fence until it bent enough for me to fall over. Climbing up a chain-link fence was not an option at that moment. Luckily, instead of him following me, he ran the other direction. He just left his car on the side of the freeway. Once I was over the fence, I realized that I was on the same horse trails that I was familiar with because I had worked at the equestrian center nearby. So I just walked through the miles of trails until I got into the nearest city, which was Burbank, and called the police from a bowling alley. I never found out what happened to that psycho. The cops never told me after I made the report, but I hope he got arrested for, trying to kidnap and rape me. So, crazy, sadistic psycho rapist.
Let's never, ever meet again.
I used to daydream about driving across the country in an RV and seeing the world. I had wanderlust like no other, and the van dwellers on Instagram really made it look so easy and fun. I was hooked, and after I made up my mind, I bought a van and souped it up with a bed, drawers, storage, bike rack, and even a little bathroom area. The tiny home on wheels held so much potential, and the future looked so bright. Or so I thought. I made my way to the first destination on my list, Charleston, USA. It was beautiful, and I had dreams of spending my days on the beach and watching the sun rise and set each morning. Well, as some of you may or may not know, this was a van, and some stealth camping needed to be done to ensure safety, and that I wouldn't get towed or bothered by law enforcement. Volume levels were low, and lights were always dimmed when I spent time in my van. Not only that, but the windows were tinted, and I had curtains as well, so you really couldn't see anything through them. On the first night, I decided to park in a back alleyway parking lot with no street lights and no pedestrian traffic. I felt safe and comfortable enough to relax and play some Pokemon on my DS. I was propped up on a pillow that was laying against the back double doors. About 30 minutes after I parked, I noticed a man walk past my van. He seemed to be in a hurry, so I didn't pay him any mind. About 15 minutes pass, and I hear a jingle sound, and then scraping noises. I turn around, and there he is, the same man trying to break into my van as I'm sitting in it. Our faces are only inches apart through the glass. He doesn't see me. In this moment, I kinda reacted as if you would if a dog does something, and you want to get its attention and make it stop. And I made a weird sound. Well, that got his attention, and he looks up and squints at me. I say, "Get the fuck out." He goes, "Oh shit," and runs off. Looking back, it was kinda funny, as I know he probably didn't mean any harm and probably shit his pants when he found out I had caught him. It was really the next night that made me realize that van living isn't all it's cracked up to be. I decided to park in a more crowded area the next night. Before hunkering down, I drove to a nearby grocery store to grab food. Little naive me thought, since this is a grocery store, I should be able to have my lights on bright and not be bothered. I turn the lights up and do some cleaning before bed, folding clothes, fluffing pillows, sweeping, etc. I notice a car across the parking lot that's cranked up with its lights on, but hasn't actually pulled out yet. I don't pay it any mind and finish up my cleaning. The next thing I know, the same car is driven up behind my van and is just sitting in the lane not moving. I wait for a while and it doesn't budge, so I decided to cut off my lights and sit in the driver's seat to observe. It still doesn't move. My internal alarm system is going berserk, so I decide to get the hell out of there and crank up my van so I can leave. I need to pull out, but the car is blocking me. I start inching out in reverse, and the driver finally gets the message and drives away. I watch the car leave and stop at an intersection. There are only two ways it could go. I thought it could either go left, which exits the parking lot and means that the person isn't a threat, or it could go right, which circles back into the parking lot and means that this person probably is a threat. I wait and watch. For some reason, I don't see which direction the car turns. I chalk it up to getting confused and being paranoid. After a few minutes, I decide to leave. Remember when I said that there were only two ways the car could go? Well, I was wrong. There was another way it could go, and that direction is straight, and into another parking lot. When I arrive at the intersection, wouldn't you know it, it's the car from before, and it's parked, still cranked, with its lights on, facing the intersection. I'm sweating bullets, and book it over to where I planned on sleeping, hoping that I'm driving fast enough to lose this creep. My spot for the night was going to be a 24-hour gym. People walking across a lot at all hours of the night. It seemed like the perfect place to sleep. Since the previous night, I almost had a break-in while parked in a dark, empty area. I park and wait. I don't see anyone other than gym rats with duffel bags and water bottles in their hands. I let my guard down and start getting ready for bed. Just as I'm reaching into the front seat to grab my phone, I see this car and finally the driver of the car peering into my windshield of my van, and he does see me, as my front window is the only window that isn't tinted. We lock eyes. I freak the fuck out. He starts circling my van with his vehicle, so I pull out and find a parking spot right next to the front door of the gym, where he can't circle me anymore. Well, bucko, he doesn't give up. He just parks across from me, car still cranked, lights on, facing me. I understand that I'm in danger and decide to call someone I know that lives in Charleston. Thankfully, they let me stay with them for the night, so once I got the okay to head over, I drove out of the parking lot and drove as fast as I could to my friend's house. It was 30 minutes away, and I was driving so fast that I don't even know if or how long the guy was following me. Needless to say, #van life is a lot more dangerous than the Instagram van dwellers would have you think. I felt duped and eventually got an apartment. I feel a lot safer, and even though I would still like to travel, I intend to stay at an RV park the next go around. As far as the stalker I encountered, how about let's not meet again, shall we?